And a very good evening to you, and welcome to today's edition of Politics 101. Of course, I'm David Hines here. This evening, we continue our conversation on the budget. And as I promised, this week we are going to have three opposition parties giving us their take on the budget. We kick it off tonight with the People's National Congress giving us their take on the budget. Much has been said, of course, about the budget. And as we've been saying all along, this budget says a lot about what the intentions of the PPP are as far as economic development or on the development of Guyana is concerned. It tells us a lot about the PPP's so-called vision for Guyana. It tells us a lot about what the PPP intend to do with the oil resources. And so it is a pivotal budget, the first real oil and gas budget, oil budget. And we intend to pick it apart and to come at it from different angles. The government, of course, presented the budget. It was prepared by the government by itself. Nobody else, no other party had an input in preparation of the budget. And so therefore, I want to give the political parties of the opposition a chance to critique the budget, but also to give us their budget proposals. What would they have done if they were in office? Often we think of the opposition just opposing, and we are saying that well, we need a real redefinition of the opposition, because the opposition is part of governance in the Westminster system. The opposition is part of government. It is part of government. In our adopted Westminster in the Caribbean, we, in practice, keep the opposition out of governance. And we've been arguing all along, even if there is not a formal power sharing arrangement, the Constitution in Article 13 talks about inclusive governance. It's a broad concept, but these concepts, these elastic concepts, can be as broad as you want them to be, and they can be as narrow as you want them to be. Article 13 could be construed to mean practical joint shared governance. It can be construed to mean just formal consultation. And it can be construed to mean anything in between those two extremes. But suffice to say, the PPP prepared the budget by itself, did not get any input. The PNC, before the budget was presented, made public its proposals, and Mr. Jagdeo literally laughed at the proposals presented. He didn't talk about what the PNC proposed. He didn't get into that. But the fact that they presented an alternative proposal, alternative budget, is what he was laughing at the whole concept of inclusive governance. So the PNC is going to present their critique of the present budget and their own proposals this evening. Tomorrow night we have the WPA, led by Professor Clive Thomas. And then on Thursday, the AFC will present their a critique of the budget and their proposals. Next week, I'll have the trade unions do it. Because what we want to do on a program like this is that, contrary to what the PPP likes to tell its supporters, that these chaps on social media, they're out there causing trouble, they're out there instigating people to overthrow the government, all kinds of nonsense. But we want to be an example to them of what a media program should be. We, of course, want to educate, we want to mobilize, we want to be democratic in terms of opinion sharing. That is, we give every possible political tendency a chance to be part of the conversation. So this is a democratic conversation that is meant to educate, to inform, to analyze, to critique, and to present alternatives to what we are saying is wrong. And so these platforms, this one in particular, wants to set an example to the rest of Guyana as to what media in the 21st century in a place like Guyana ought to be. So we are about the business of seriousness on a program like this. So the opposition, which of course are shut out of the mainstream media, we notice there has been an improvement, better late than never. But we will continue to do what we have been doing for the last year and more. And that is to continue to inform, to educate, to share, and of course to mobilize, because that is important, to mobilize our people. So tonight, the leader of the People's National Congress is here, and he is going to give the PNC's critique of the present budget and also talk about the PNC's alternative to what the government has presented. So please share the live link. Let everyone know that Politics 101 is on and Aubrey Norton is here with us. It is particularly important Aubrey joins us because he has recently been elected leader of the PNC, the first PNC leader in the the oil era. The oil era, whether we like it or not, Guyana has entered a new era. We are now an oil-producing country, a post-plantation society, which is an oil-producing country. I repeat, a post-plantation Caribbean country that is going to be an oil-producing nation in the 21st century. Of course, we have had Trinidad and Tobago, our sister CARICOM country, but it became an oil-producing nation in a different era, in the early years of independence, in the nationalist era. If we divide Caribbean politics into modern Caribbean politics, into the decolonization era, starting with the 1930s uprisings, and then the immediate post-independence era, starting with independence in the early 1960s, where we can go back to the Federation in 58, and then political independence starting with Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica in 62. Coming right through to the end of the 1980s, the period, what I call the nationalist period, the period when our Caribbean countries attempted to answer the critical question of what kind of independence do we want? Did we want an independence whose content maintained the colonial status quo? Or did we want an independence that attempted, at least attempted, to deal with the critical questions that face societies like ours in the wake of independence? The challenge of turning plantations into nations, the challenge of dealing with the scars of bondage that have been left on these societies. And the years from the 1960s to the end of the 1980s were critical in that we were becoming nations in the context of the Cold War. We were becoming nations in a world that wasn't created for us, because when the victors of the Second World War sat down in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, and came up with a new world order, we were not nations. And so we were becoming nations in a world that wasn't made for us. We were becoming nations during the Cold War when two superpowers held the world at ransom. And every country in the world had to respond to that competition between the two ideological poles. And so Trinidad and Tobago was an oil nation in that era. Guyana is becoming an oil nation in the era of globalization that began at the end of the Cold War in the late 80s, when the experiments of the nationalist era were forcefully ditched by internal forces, but also critically by objective changes in the world. The world had become a unipolar world where one superpower and one ideology ruled the roost for the most part over the last 40 years. And we now have China emerging as an economic superpower, Russia re-emerging as a political superpower. But we in Guyana and the Caribbean are still in the clutches, if you will, of the United States. We're sitting in what they've always referred to as their backyard. We have found oil in Guyana in the era of globalization. What does that mean for Guyana? We have found oil in an era when China is becoming a superpower, when the United States, which had removed its gaze from the Caribbean and had gone to places like the Middle East, is now at least returning its economic gaze to the Caribbean. We have found oil where the United States is attempting regime change in a country next door to us, another oil producing country. I'm giving this political context and historical context to say that in a country like Guyana, it's not simply we found oil. You have to understand the society. You have to understand your country's history. You have to understand your country's place in the region, in the hemisphere, in the world. You have to understand from where your country came. What happened in this country after the Middle Passage? What happened after colonialism ended? What were the challenges that were faced? You have to understand your country. One of the problems I have is when I listen to Ashley Singh and Irfan Ali and Jack Dio, I'm listening to people who do not know the society. Then they know economics. I don't think you can say Jack Dio doesn't know economics. He knows economics. Ashley Singh got to be a bright boy. He must know some economics. I don't know much about Mr. Ali or Dr. Ali or whatever, but I know Ashley Singh know economics. I know thing. Do they understand the history of economic thought as it relates to the Caribbean? Do they understand the history of Caribbean political economy and Guyanese political economy? Do they understand the relationship between an ethnically plural society and economic development? I'm raising these questions not to say to you that we are bright on this side of the aisle. But to say that we on this side of the aisle, we believe that vision is important. And that vision has to be grounded in an understanding of the society. And that's my introduction tonight. As I introduce the leader of the People's National Congress, himself an academic, himself a political activist, and that whatever you can say about Martin, he understands those questions that I raised just now. And that is why our conversation tonight will be of a different tone from the one that's happening over there. Sometimes the burden of lifting your country out of mediocrity lies with one side. Mr. Norton, good night.
Good evening.
Well, look, you see the man correct me right away. It's not night yet, it's evening. You know, remember when we were small boys and we do Spanish, we learned that there's a difference between Buenos Tardes and Buenos Noches.
Correct.
How have you been doing? I notice you've been doing a lot of outreaches, going into the communities there in my part, your part of the country and the East Coast. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I believe that if you're going to solve the problems of a country, you first and foremost will have to understand the country. More importantly, the people in the country. Consequence, therefore, I have a number of outreach programs across the country that are aimed at ensuring we're in contact with people and we get feedback from them. For instance, while the government is in parliament talking about agriculture, in the Bacalus we learned that the Minister of Agriculture went there a while back, promised them a road so that they can bring out their agricultural produce, and up until now there is none. And so that and others would have informed us. So we have a clear idea as to what the people's needs are. For instance, a lot of people, while the government was saying who benefiting, etc., a lot of people in the field, they were telling us that they're finding difficulties making ends meet. Any family of 3 or 4 is in deep trouble in terms of delivering to their family the things they need based on the income they have. And so the outreach into the villages, those outreaches are aimed at giving us the knowledge of what is happening on the ground. Simultaneously, I have been meeting with the diplomatic community, which is a different kind of outreach. And in those engagements, I've been outlining to them where we think the economy should go, where we think the country should go politically. We have been outlining the case for a clean voters list and pointing out to the diplomatic community that one element of election is procedural, and one element of democracy, is procedural, and to realize that it's elections. But if you have a flawed elections list, you cannot conclude the outcome of those elections will be free and fair. And so we have placed on the top of the agenda this whole question of a clean voters list. We've also been informing the international community about the problems vis-a-vis governance. For instance, we have brought to their attention the number of people who are charged without committing offenses, And then the government and the police have the audacity to tell you they're now preparing the case. Where in the world do you charge people and then look for evidence? Only in Guyana. So the outreaches have been serving their purpose.
And you said straight off the bat that one of the things that you are learning in these outreaches is the extent to which people are economically deprived, to the extent to which the mismanagement of the economy, I would think, along with the pandemic, and along with the historical poverty of all combined over the last year or two, to really push our people to places where they have not gone in a long time. I referenced the era of the early years of independence, when the government of Guyana and other Caribbean, so-called third world governments grappled with the consequences of the long period of colonialism. And in a sense, what we are doing now is grappling with really the consequences of 40 years of structural justice and its impact, and it's really staring our people straight in the face. And you don't learn about that from a mega public meeting where you go into a country, set up a big stage, and make big fancy speeches, and then you leave. You learn about it from talking to people in the street corner, the lady coming out at her gate and talking to Mr. Norton and telling you, I'm mining chicken, and here are the challenges I'm getting. How refreshed you feel as a political activist when you come out of those outreaches in terms of your own political and understanding of how the society is changing. Because both of us agree you have to know the society, but you also have to know the motion of the society. How those outreaches have, in a sense, brought you up to date with the recent motions in the society.
All right. This afternoon, I was in Mecca. Some residents in Mecca asked me to come and meet them to discuss their problems. Now, there's the East Bank Road that is passing through the area. These people are not in the way of the road. But what has been happening is this: they are not in the way, but I don't know if it is the government or it's just tricksters. But the document they're showing you has at the top Ministry of Finance Valuation Department. Now, what people are doing is that they are going into these areas. It's a predominantly Afro-Guyanese area. And they are seeking to sign an agreement in which they offer people who live there, and they told me it ranged between 2 and 22 million, for them to remove their houses and to use the money they give to go somewhere else. I said to them today, they shouldn't do that. Because while 20 or 22 million dollars will look good to them, no, this road is going to be completed in like a year maximum or so. And when that thoroughfare opens, those same property, the value will go up to as much as $100 million. So I see it as a scheme to browbeat poor people, to get them to move, and then those close to the government will go in and seek to put businesses and to make back that money in no time. I have said to many of them that I spoke with today that they should not move. They are not in the way of the road. What they should do is prepare to develop the area so that they can benefit from the road that will pass through there. And so it worries me that a government or people operating on behalf of the government would seek to swindle poor people for their own ends. And what I learned today in Mocha is that people will go to any ends, especially those related to this government, to make money at the expense of the people. And so I will begin now to look out for the other areas in which they are doing the same thing. Because it does appear to me that there are some areas the PPP supporters dominate. But places like they want to get them off the main road so that they can make money and continue to keep those people in poverty. And so we will have to fight that, even if it demands, and these people have documents for the land to survey it, etc. So I see it as a sinister plot. And I've promised them that I will work with them, including find legal assistance to ensure that they can stay there and benefit when the road comes through the area. But it really worries me that people can go that far to take advantage of people so that they can get their lands and get wealthy. I will also query because the document, and in the document, they put the persons, when they get this money, they will be given a house lot, and then in 3 months, they have to break down what they have. So you see, really, it's a scheme to dispossess them and to move them out of an area that is fertile for business and put them in some area with a house lot alone. And by the time they build the house, the money done. Whereas if they stay where they are, they can open businesses that will benefit them continuously.
And thank you for that update, because that is exactly what I'm talking about. You're not going to see a story like that in the newspapers. You're not going to see a story like that on the evening news, because journalism is no longer about going into communities and doing investigative work. Journalism has now become grandstanding. And so it is up to parties, political parties and others, to go into those communities and to really bring those stories to the fore so that the rest of the country, I'm sure it's in Mocha, but it would be in other villages that road is likely to pass through. And so the outreaches are so important. Let's move quickly to the business at hand tonight, and that's the national budget. Prior to the reading of the budget, and I don't know why they still read the budget. A man stand up 5 hours there reading a budget. What you need to do is lay before the House of Assembly, I think, the budgetary, both a summary of the budget and the actual budget document. And the Minister of Finance spends about an hour going over a summary of the budget and let the debate happen. Not standing there for 5 hours reading. Who will remember that? It's something that is so quaint and foolish. Well, anyhow, before the budget was read, your party put out its own budgetary proposals, its own proposals for the national budget. What prompted that move?
Well, first of all, the government failed to consult, and we thought our views should be known. And so we developed those positions and put them out there. But we also wanted to give the Guyanese people an idea of what they should demand and what they should get. And we felt once we laid these measures out and showed how they will benefit the Guyanese people, then the Guyanese people will have something to judge this budget against. For instance, we carry the argument that this is our first oil budget. You're saying the economy is going to grow about 49%, yet you are giving benefits to people 10% and below. What that says is that the budget is not serving the people of this country. It is serving the PPP elite, friends, and families. And we wanted people to recognize that the government has the capacity to give more. In 4 years or so, we give 77% to workers while there was no oil. If you are getting revenues from oil, then it should be obvious that at minimum you could have replicated that. But you give way below that. So you are signaling to people that you are not a caring government, you have no interest in the working people, and we had to expose that. Now, I noticed, for instance, or let me put it differently. If you have $100
Mhm.
and you are giving away $10, and then you get $1,000 and you give away 20 to poor people, it means there's a disproportion in your allocation, because with more income, the vulnerable, the poor, should get more. And in this budget, we're not seeing that happening. And so the first real criticism of this budget is that for the money that is expended in it, the poor, the vulnerable, the disadvantaged, small business, micro businesses, young men and women, single parent, none of them, no one is getting what they should get. And that is our first major criticism of the budget. Take the single parent family. A single parent family tends to have to expend more. A lot of times the single parent can't leave the children at home. This is COVID. They can't leave the children at home. Therefore, they have to find somebody to look at them. And even if they leave them at home, the social risks increases. Adolescence period, deviant behavior also increases. And so we thought that in the context of the social problems we had, we would have seen resources allocated to help single parents. And not only with money, the APNU AFC had a program in which we were building early childhood education centers so those parents can leave their children and be able to go to work. And we had trained people to work in those centers so that they can take care of children. There is no such mechanism in this budget to cater to that vulnerable group. And so one sees that there is no intention of dealing with the social problems. This budget says little and allocate little or nothing to deal with COVID-19. And so one has to conclude that they do not show an interest in the people of Guyana, especially the poor. This budget is big on exaggeration. They talk about create employment, but they give no figures. They tell you about call centers and all the reports from the call centers, including that one in Linden that they're talking a lot about. People are going on the job and leaving the job. And so you're not really creating jobs. These 50,000 jobs you created, where are they? And even the little that you would have created, people are not earning enough from them. So it is not just a question of job creation. It is the creation of jobs that will allow people to pay their bills and to live a happy life. Again, the budget fails to address this issue of cushioning the social impacts and allowing people to live the life that they should live. We pointed out that the resources allocated to small businesses, those resources have declined. One would have thought that with oil resources, and I'm making the assumption here that the minister responsible for finance in the ministry of the presidency understands that it is small and medium-sized businesses that will grow an economy. And in this budget, they reduce the money. In our presentation leading up to the budget, we specifically asked for resources to be put aside to deal with this issue because we need to expand small and micro businesses. Another laughable thing in this budget is the attempt to suggest that the world is having inflation, so we shouldn't worry about inflation. The truth of the matter is the world is experiencing inflation, but countries that have the interests of their people at heart will put measures in place to deal with inflation and to reduce the impact. And so we had said in our presentation that we expected the government to put more into agriculture so as to increase agricultural production. And an APNU AFC government in future will not only put resources in agriculture, but it will do considerable work to improve the agro-processing industry. Now, once we can increase agriculture, increase agro-processing, we will be producing more goods in the society, and that will act as a measure against inflation. As I understand it, and I'm no economist, that one of the things governments try to do when economies experience inflation is to put measures in place to ensure people save. As I understand it, less money, therefore, will be chasing the goods. This government seems to be pro-inflation. They are spending like wild hombres in the West. And so they clearly will be fueling the inflation. And so it must be a critique of this government that the budget has no anti-inflationary measures, and therefore we are heading down the wrong road. Now, one also has to recognize that if an economy has become an oil-producing economy, it means that a lot of resources will be emanating from the oil and gas sector. And therefore, one would have expected measures to encourage Guyanese to go into other sectors. First, by diversifying, and secondly, by providing the resources that will make those areas lucrative. We have seen nothing like that in this budget. There are no measures to cause people to want to go into another sector outside of the oil sector. So we see a diversification and we act against inflation. And so clearly, the government has no intention of going in that direction. And so the budget is a manifestation of the incompetence of this government. The incompetence is manifest in the fact that the critical areas they should be addressing, they are not addressing. What they appear to be doing is creating the conditions for more funds in the society so that the PPP elite friends and family, through corruption, can become wealthier. And so the budget, in large measure, is a facade for those people we mentioned to be able to get rich through corrupt means. Now, let's assume they had followed our recommendation and moved the threshold to $125,000 rather than this $75,000. It means since a lot of the persons in this country earn somewhere between the minimum wage and 125,000, it would have meant that they would not have been paying tax. It would have meant real income for them. And it would also mean that our people's lives would have been improving. They give a measly 70,000, which means that very few will benefit from the increase in the threshold. If they had made it 125,000, many more people would have benefited. So again, we see the focus is not on delivering resources to the people. It is about creating conditions for their cronies to get rich. And therefore, they did not increase the threshold. Now, one would think, when you look at it, that they would have come up with proper infrastructural development plans that would have contributed to the development of Guyana. Now, you imagine this government. There was a proposal for the East Bank Road to go to Ogle. They are now going to put it through South Rheinveld. What that means is that you are going to clog up another section of Georgetown. This is going to be Mandela Avenue right through to Sheriff Street. Whereas, if common sense had prevailed and they would have carried it, say, to Ogle, you could have had different cutoffs. So somebody who doesn't want to go into Georgetown didn't have to pass through Georgetown. But I don't think Wanajil has the ability to comprehend such simple things. You don't need to be an engineer to know that your road development should seek to ease traffic congestion and ensure flow of traffic. What the PPP is doing here is producing another bottleneck. It reminds me, and you know what people miss? It is the PPP that built Diamond. And their incompetence and lack of vision resulted in all the gridlock on the East Bank. Because in conceptualizing Grove Diamond, they did not develop roads, alternative roads. They probably don't even read, because since the Burnham era, there were drawings, etc., for roads to do just that. And so they created this monster on the East Bank. And now they are going on like if they are solving the problem on the East Bank. Even if they solve it, it was they who created it because of their stupidity and an inability to plan. This budget has to be criticized for its lack of vision. And that piece of road work is a manifestation of the absence of vision and planning. And therefore, there should be clear criticisms of what is happening here. What this country needs is a comprehensive road program that allows it to create a network of highways that will allow traffic to flow, will reduce congestion, and at the same time open lands. But if you know what I told you about Mocha Grove area, they are only interested in opening lands for their cronies. And I sense they recognize that there are some areas there, and the only place that they can get a little problem with, because it's a constituency that doesn't vote for them, is Mocha. And so they are going down that road. But clearly, there is an absence of vision, there's an absence of plans, and I must submit an absence of common sense.
Absence of vision, plan, and common sense. Aubrey Norton here making the case that the 2022 budget really does not address the needs of the working people or working peoples of Guyana, not enough emphasis on developing poor people, not enough emphasis on small businesses. It means that if monies are not going to the working people, it must be going somewhere. And that somewhere, of course, is at the top among the business class, the entrepreneurial class, the class that helped to effect regime change last year, the class that through economics wants to control Guyana, the class that stands as the gateway between Guyana and the flight of our capital and our resources to foreign countries. A class that has not always been patriotic. So, a united Guyana. Not always been patriotic to Guyana, where the historical gap between the rich and the poor is decreased. Aubrey Norton, is your party comfortable with the resources through this budget that are given to the entrepreneurial class? When you first took power, you said that the PNC is pro-business. You said, but however, not pro-private sector. You made that distinction. And of course, making a plea for the mixed economy, where you have small businesses, the working people having a livable wage, and of course, entrepreneurs at the top. But it has to be collaborative. But this budget, it seems to me, is weighted towards the big entrepreneurs. What do you think?
Look, I read in the budget they are going to create farm markets with the aim of reducing the cost of living. I don't know. I've seen them create. If you go through Diamond, you will see there is a market there that isn't. They put one in Linden years ago, and it ended up just being a tarmac for children to play on. I
Yes.
mean, how could you come at the budgetary level now and say you're going to increase these markets with the aim of cutting out the middleman? Are you going to put one in every village? It makes absolutely no sense. But to deal with the issue in a comprehensive way will not create the conditions for them to get money to steal. But when you do these projects and you cost the tarmac at some couple million well and your supporters gone with it, they don't care if after that it just becomes something for children to play on. The level of lawlessness of this regime doesn't permit orderly development of Guyana. Now, take the Suzdike Linden Highway. Since I know it, there is a certain distance from the highway you must be on the right and a certain distance on the left. The PPP has given away a lot of lands on the highway, very close to the highway, that will affect future development in Linden and along the highway. The minute you turn into Linden on the right hand side, there is a business there that comes very close to the road. There is no scope for you to develop a 4 or 6 lane highway. What that means is that they will turn around later and say they compensate them for the land. Now, we have to have some kind of orderliness in the development. An APNU AFC government will focus on development that caters for future generation. You can't just give away lands on the highway close to the road and you're not catering for expansion. So again, we see the visionlessness. But there are a number of things that should be happening that aren't. Take the social sector. I was scrutinizing the budget to see the resources that are placed in there to deal with suicide. Nothing really. For
Mm-hmm.
mental health generally. Now we have a situation where a lot of our children drop out of school. Some of them come out of school without 5 CXC with math and English. And some of them get 5, but they don't have math and English. And there is no mechanism after school. The APNU AFC had begun to put night schools in place. This government is closing them down. Guyana needs night schools in key strategic areas to allow the children that the education system that the PPP produced failed. And so, if you want to deal with the social problems you have to go to the root. And the root is the dysfunctions in the social systems in the society. And unless we can put resources into the budget to deal with single parent families, to deal with school dropouts, to deal with that large bunch that would have gone to school but didn't get enough to get a job or to go to university, then you are encouraging the dysfunctions in the society. And I would have thought that with the coming of oil resources, more would have been placed in the social sector. I mentioned the whole question of early childhood trainings, early childhood centers to take children, put them there with trained people. Government continues to believe that the focus must solely be on law enforcement. oh, we call out the police and they do whatever. A lot of the problems that end up in the police station are social problems that need social workers' attention. I would recommend to government and an APNU AFC government will develop a system of first for training social workers properly and then for placing them in places like police stations so that they can address social problems. What we have is since somebody arrive at the station, take off your belt, go in the lockup. Or give me a Granger and you could go. Now, those cannot solve the social problems in the society. We need proper social programs to deal with the problems in the society. I look at what they have for sport. Well, I could understand the minister wouldn't know what to do. But if it was a proper government, you would have seen a comprehensive plan for sport linked to dealing with social problems because sport can contribute in terms of dealing with your social problems. And I think they need to see sport as an investment because when countries are doing well in sport, they become popular and they become attractive. Even with all the talk about the environment, there is no evidence in this budget that the ecotourism will be developed as another sector in the society. And so you see, Ashley's things stood for hours, exaggerated, regurgitated, but when it came to actual measures to propel the Guyanese economy forward and to help the poor, he was a disaster, an unmitigated disaster.
Aubrey Norton, leader of the PNC, giving the PNC's take on Budget 2022. We're doing a series tomorrow evening. You're going to have the WPA on, led by Professor Clive Thomas, Takumo Gunse, and Kedaki Amsterdam will be part of that panel, Professor Thomas. And then on Thursday, the AFC will give their take, led by their leader, Mr. Ramjatan, Kathy Hughes, and David Patterson. Focus on the budget. That's our business this week. We're focusing on the budget not because we want to talk, but we want to talk sense. We want to expose what is behind those numbers. We want to expose what kind of vision, if there is any, behind those numbers. And we want to propose also on the opposition side of the aisle, we have alternatives to where the government wants to take us. It's very clear from what you've heard from Mr. Norton tonight, that from a social class standpoint, this budget does not address the issues, the problems that face the working peoples of this country. Whether those working people are those at the social bottom, or whether those working people are somewhere in the middle, they're working, their wages are not keeping up with the cost of living. The government has increased spending by 44%, but nothing in the budget increases the resources by the same amount. The inequities,
or even half.
Not even half. The social inequities in the budget. This is a budget that will increase the social inequities in the society. And that, of course, in an era of oil, is a contradiction. You will boast about 47% growth, but you will have negative growth in terms of the real wages of your people. And if you underdevelop your people, you're really underdeveloping your society. There are particular needs that are built into the social infrastructure of countries like Guyana. They're post-plantation societies. They come with the consequences of post-plantation. Poverty is one of the things that has been left with developed countries like Guyana. We have never had the kind of resources that are needed to tackle poverty in a comprehensive way. The early post-colonial government tackled poverty by improving education, expanding education access. That was very important. People like Aubrey Norton, myself, and many of you in the audience were able to at least come out and do better than our parents and to the expansion of education, the expansion of healthcare. And so there were investments, but the government in the early post-independence era did not have the resources. And when the international system, the global system, made it very difficult to sustain those endeavors such as education from nursery to university, then we were thrown to the wolves, to the IMF and the World Bank. Structural adjustment. Our societies were really taken right back to financial slavery. And now with oil resources, we have a chance to deal with the maladies that came at us from colonialism. We have a chance to deal with the maladies that were imposed by structure. But as Aubrey has been saying, this government lacks vision. And vision has to come from a progressive view of the world around you. You have to be aware of your society. You have to be aware of the world around your society. And you have to understand how the historical problems affect the society in different ways. The countryside, poverty operates differently than if you're in the urban area. It's poverty, but it manifests itself differently. So you have to have policies that are targeted at some communities. What do we see? We saw an increase in government subvention to Region 1, increase to Region 2, increase to Region 3. These are three regions controlled by the PPP at the regional level. Region 4, the largest region, we not only have a decrease, but a decrease from 21 million to 18 million. While in Region 2, you have an increase. Region 1, an increase. Region 3, an increase. And so when you do that, you have an add on top of the social impact. You are now moving into a political and ethnic impact. Because not only are these regions politically friendly to the PPP, but they have ethnic profiles. So on top of the social deprivation, you're adding ethnic deprivation to people. And so this is a terrible budget. Aubrey, what do you make of those figures that I just cited there? The increases in certain regions and the decrease in Region 4.
Essentially, what we are seeing is discrimination in the allocation of resources, not only by region, but by NDCs and specific communities. In our presentation, the PNCR presentation on the budget, we did say first in our New Year's speech and then in our press statement that we have to govern Guyana and shift it towards economic freedom, where the market plays a role in the allocation of resources and government intervene to ensure equity. We have a situation in Guyana where there is no push towards economic freedom. The government more and more centralizes power in its hands so that it can, in a discriminatory fashion, allocate resources. What that means is that anybody or any company that does not fall into the good books of the People's Progressive Party, they are discriminated against and they are not allocated the resources. And so there is this serious problem of discrimination in the allocation of resources that we need to deal with. It is also compounded by the fact that the government does not believe in civil society. It is no other than Barajak Deo, who suggested that because civil society organizations do not contest in elections, they should have no say in matters of critical importance. Now, the danger in that is it is the state that is allocating the resources, but you do not see civil society as playing a role to ensure accountability, transparency, etc. And therefore, it is not just resource allocation problems, it is a repressive regime that is seeking to miniaturize civil society. And in the process, they are developing a dictatorial regime, not only, excuse me, not only at the political level, but also at the economic level. And so one has to see the paltry sums given to Region 7, 4, and 10 as part of the economic and resource allocation discrimination that is practiced by this government. The budget is a manifestation of the fact that this government does not believe in one Guyana. And if it does, it has to explain why it is creating two Guyanas. All that we have said would have pointed clearly to a situation where the Barrett Jagdeo Irfan Ali government is increasing the inequities in the society, turning on the screws of repression, and using resource allocation to ensure little or no role for a market economy. Even when you talk to big corporate companies, they are afraid because they see the government as having no interest in economic freedom and therefore can target people politically so that they can stop them from realizing their potential and that they stay in control of what is happening. I have said before, the guiding philosophy of the People's Progressive Party is political, economic, social control and domination. They pay lip service to democracy, but they are dominators. They are dictators. They are people who do not believe in one iota of democracy. And that is how we must see them. And the budget is a reflection of their underpinning philosophy, that philosophy of domination, control, marginalization, and ostracization of those who they perceive not to support them.
Aubrey Norton, leader of the People's National Congress, giving his party's take on the national budget, which is being debated right now in the National Assembly as we speak. That debate kicked off yesterday, and we've had some very incisive presentations from the opposition side of the aisle, kicked off yesterday by Amanza Walton Desir and others, Mahai Paul, Ganesh Mahai Paul, and we had the chairman of the PNC, young man, speaking yesterday. Aubrey, there is the issue that is being raised about the monies from the Natural Resource Fund being misappropriated in the budget. And Christopher Ram, for example, has used the strong language that they're using the money illegally. Has your party taken a position on that issue?
Yes, I think Amanzo Walton, MP Amanzo Walton, in her presentation, did suggest that he needed to bring a statement to Parliament as to what they were doing, etc. Now, in the nature of the PPP, they pay no respect to law. Rule of law has no meaning to them. For them, they are going to take the money, violate the law, and move on. We have to find ways and means of making them accountable. But it is evident that they are in violation of law. As I understand it also, if it was going to be, first of all, the money should not have been for budget support. It should have been really for your developmental projects, etc. And you bring the statement. But look, you know, in the nature of the People's Progressive Party, law doesn't matter. And so we oppose what they're doing, but we know that they are not people who are responsive to persuasion and political speeches.
They're not open to political speeches and so forth. We have to continue to struggle on all fronts as we confront a government like this. And in the time of budget, we are seeing where the monies are allocated, where they're misallocated. We have had the history of what Professor Clive Thomas called the criminalized state, the way in which the government uses the state to misappropriate and to channel resources to their cronies. Amanda Desir talked about, very interestingly, she cited the IMF talking about a 41% inefficiency. It's a nice word to say that is still 41% of the money. That's what it means. And that amounts to $89 billion that are likely to be misappropriated within the context of inefficiency. That's the kind of Guyana that we're living in. That's the kind of things that they don't want us to know. Aubrey, do you all intend in the PNC? I know you've been doing outreaches. Do you all intend to go into the communities? I mean, a community like Linden, some of those villages on the East Coast, Moko. And at some point, you know, we were in COVID and all of that thing. But do you think it's a good idea to, in a sense, take your budget debates into the community and to talk to people about the budget and its implications for them? What do you think about that?
Yesterday, as we walk, we have produced a pamphlet that gives people information on the budget. So not only were we talking to them and understanding their problems, but we were distributing budget, handbills on the budget. Yesterday, we distributed well over 8,000 handbills in the in the East Coast Car Park area, the Linden Car Park, the Berbice Car Park, the Georgetown Car Park, all across the country yesterday. We have been distributing and putting those pamphlets in the buses. We know we're not going to be able to meet all these communities, but we know the message can go by way of handbills. For instance, when we went to the Linden, or when the team went to the Linden Car Park, they were able to put in buses going to the Rupununi, buses going to Mad. When you went to Barbies Car Park, you could put in buses going to Ring 56. So we were able to disseminate the information and give a pamphlet, because long after you would have gone, a pamphlet is likely to remain. So we are carrying the message across the country. We are seeking some other ways to do it. And I want to say to you that it is the intention of the People's National Congress Reform to become a truly grassroots party with units in all our communities and the mechanisms to distribute our literature and other information in all the communities. So, yes, we will take it outside of Georgetown and the East Coast and meet out to our people.
Is there any hint you see in this budget that suggests that the PP might be thinking about a snap election?
I don't know if I will call it snap, but I know they are looking at an early election. Now, for me, an early has to be defined as meaning after a clean voters list. We must be clear in our heads. You can't go with a flawed list and then call it democracy. One of the bases of democracy is free and fair elections, and you cannot have free and fair elections with a flawed list. And so a clean voters list is important.
Now, hold on, let me pin you down on the clean vote. Let me pin you down on the clean voters list. Because remember, the court said last year, before the last, that you can't interfere with the list insofar as you can't take people
As
off.
I understand the court ruling, you cannot take off people, etc. But there are means by which you could arrive at a clean list. I don't want to get into the details, but we can arrive at a clean list.
And you intend to press those. You intend to press those alternative ways.
Correct. Yes.
The chairman of GCOM year before the last, or the year before then, remember, she stopped house-to-house registration, which was one of the ways.
But do you agree? As I understand it, the law is clear when it comes to births and deaths.
Yes.
And there's a mechanism by which you can take the dead people off the list.
All right.
I just give you one.
Right. And your party is working on that, because what I want our audience to do is to understand that you are moving from slogan to a plan.
Correct.
Exactly.
You have to. You have to. Okay. We have to have a strategy for everything, including how we clean the voters list.
Wonderful.
And we are working assiduously on this.
Yes, you were expanding. You said the voters list is one thing we have to get over, and then there were some other things you wanted to say that would be preconditions for free and fair elections.
Well, there are many conditions that should exist for a free and fair election. One of them is an independent elections commission. I don't see how you're going to get it without an independent. A clean voters list is another one. I notice the government is hell-bent on using its supporters, bottom houses, as polling places. All of those issues we'll have to challenge.
What ideas you have for an alternative to the present composition of the of GCOM, which is a political commission with, in theory, an independent chair, but that's in theory. In practice, it doesn't appear to be that way. Are you advocating? Go ahead.
In the kind of context, I don't think we should focus solely on an independent chairman.
Okay.
We also need to focus on mechanisms. For instance, I believe something like the appointment of the CEO should not be determined by a casting vote of the chairman. It should be something that has to be determined by consensus of the parties.
Mhm.
Because you can have a chairman who purports to be independent and then they don't act independent. But if you have 3-3 and you have to negotiate to arrive at what you want, then it's a different ball game. So there, I have some views on how we could improve the commission, and that will be one such proposal. That there are certain things should not be decided by the casting vote of a chair because they are too critical to the body politic in Guyana to be left to one casting vote.
You're talking about an improvement of the governance mechanisms within
Correct.
GCOM. Wonderful,
Yes.
wonderful,
Well,
wonderful.
there's need for improvement of the governance mechanism generally, but specifically in the case of GCOM, it is needed.
The PPP, no doubt, starting with the chief elections officer, and there are other offices that are in need that are going to be filled. And there seems to be a clear strategy of getting PPP people or people sympathetic to the party in those staff positions. Is that something your party is looking at? And is that part of the
We have noted, look, the PPP historically sought to ensure that they have people in key positions in GCOM that they control. Let us not forget Buru. You know, as they talk, they forget Buru, which is clear evidence that when they're in government, they like to be in total control. And so those are issues we will deal with because we have memories of Boodoo, first of all, announcing a seat for the PPP when it should have gone to the AFC. And then we saw what he tried in the 2015 election. We believe they will take the same manuscript in this new situation, and we will have to deal with it.
My concern, Brian Moses, is asking a real question here. He's asking why would the PPP go with that GCOM restructuring that you're talking about?
Well, I didn't suggest that they will go with it. Like I've always said, on these matters, you have to bring political pressure. We're doing the work in the fields, and at the right time, you can bring political pressure to achieve your objectives.
And I would be smart enough not to ask you what that political pressure would look like, because that is
And I
not
would
my
be
business.
I would be sensible enough not to answer.
Those people said tricky and tranny. So we are not talking about that. Aubrey, last time power was achieved in 2015 was as part of a coalition. As I survey the Caribbean, you notice this is in St. Lucia. The Labour Party came back to power by making an accommodation with two independent candidates who were former members of the United Workers' Party. One of them was former Prime Minister Steve. So there's a sort of coalition there. You know that St. Kitts government has what is called team unity. PAM in along with the party, so they have a coalition there. And we are noticing in the Caribbean that more and more there is talk about coalition. If you look at Barbados, 30 love in both elections, it seems to me that the Democratic Labour Party has to think about broadening its base. And it certainly may not be able to do that in the traditional way. It may have to reach out to other forces. I'm making those comments to say that coalition politics seem to be where our Caribbean is moving. And of course, the People's National Congress went into coalition with other forces in 2015. There is always the pressure in large parties to go it alone. There's always that thing. Can we go it alone? Should we go it alone? What do other people bring to the table? That's kind of stuff. And I'm sure within the PNC that you are dealing with those pressures. Question, in spite of the fragility of the spirit of coalition in our political culture, is the PNC still wedded in an ideological way, not just a practical, real politics way, but an ideological way. And I'm using the word ideological because you come out of that school that was able to pressure former leader and president Esmond Hoyt to make that famous declaration in 2002, just before he died, when he said, "Our sharing is an idea whose time has come." It was really an ideological shift on the part of the PNC. Are you still wedded, and the party still wedded to that concept? We seem to have lost Mr. Norton for a minute there. We seem to have lost Mr. Norton for a minute while we try to get him on back. And here we come.
I'm hearing you. Are you hearing me?
I'm hearing you now. Yes. Is the PNC still
I didn't get the total question. I'm assuming you're asking me if we're still committed to coalition politics.
Yes. Beyond just in an opportunistic way. Are you still ready to it in an ideological? Because my argument is that when the PNC came out in 2002, when Mr. Hoy gave that speech at the thing, he was making a shift, ideological shift. Are you still ready to coalition building and coalition in an ideological way?
I will say this. Even if a political party believes it can go it alone, and I think it has the capacity, it should still consider coalition. Because coalition brings some other things that you don't get alone. In that regard, you're aware that the PNC is speaking to the WPA. And one of the reasons we're doing that is because we believe in coalition politics. And so I would say, yes, we are committed to coalition politics, but we are also committed to ensuring that the coalition functions in a way that it brings benefit to the coalition and there is an exchange of information and ideas with the aim of finding consensus on policy issues and moving forward. In that sense, we are committed to coalition politics.
In that sense, you're committed to coalition politics. And of course, coalition politics means coalition building. You did mention just now that the PNC is speaking to the WPA. There was an initial meeting, and that conversation will likely to continue. And that is good news for supporters of this program who have been calling for amending of the fence and a readmission of the WPA back into the coalition. I can say that about our audience here. So the news that the two parties have begun to meet may be good one for this audience. So Aubrey, we have this budget. We have critiqued the budget. You have given the PNC's views on where the country should go economically. The budget, it will come and go. The estimates will be passed. What next as far as the political economy is concerned from the PNC? And you can use
First of all, I think we have to define clearly politically where we want to go. Politically, we want to see a society that is governed by law. We want to see a society in which democracy is practiced. We want to see a society in which there is good governance, there is equity, transparency, and accountability. And therefore, we have to work for that because the PPP is not disposed to those principles and practice. And so, politically, we have to develop a platform to continue to educate people so that they understand our political direction and they reject the PPP's direction. Then you have to underline and explain your economic philosophy. We have said that that is based in the main on economic freedom, reducing the state power to allocate resources, and to put resources in the hands of the poor, the vulnerable, single parents, the elderly. It is appalling that pensioners will get $3,000 when you are boasting that you have a budget of over $500 billion. You should be shamed. The government should be shamed. At minimum, pensioners could have gotten at least $15,000 more. So we have to advocate for the poor, vulnerable. We have to advocate for resources for small and micro businesses and to make commitments to deliver on them when we become the next government. And so people understand our economic philosophy and support it, and we agitate to change the government. We have to do the same in the social realm. We have to do more analysis of the social problems and ensure the budgetary measures we take are aimed at solving some of the social problems or at minimum attenuating them, reducing them. Once we can have that, we also have got to outline our position on the legal system. We cannot continue with a system that is manipulated by the government. We need a judiciary that is independent. We need a judiciary that will be innovative in terms of the law because with the coming of oil and gas, cases are going to come and they will have to resort to the jurisprudential capabilities and help to resolve these issues in the interest of the people of Guyana. So once we can deal with the constitution and the other elements, we then place the case before the people of Guyana and we take the requisite political action to ensure we can realize our objectives. And meeting out diplomats, meeting our people in the community, these are all part of the framework within which we operate to achieve the strategic objective of positioning ourselves to regain political power.
Aubrey Norton, leader of the People's National Congress, giving his party's take on the national budget and related issues. Aubrey, thanks as always for coming on to the program
Thanks for
and
having me.
being available to the people. Thank you very much. And remember, tomorrow night, it's the WPA's turn. Professor Clive Thomas, well-known economist, will be here. He'll be accompanied by Kidaki Amsterdam and Takumo Gunse, longtime political activist. And on Thursday, we'll have the Alliance for Change. They will be coming on, Emerald Ramjit, Kathy Hughes, and David Patterson. And we are dedicating these programs this week to the memory of my good friend, my very, very close friend and comrade, Ronald Wilbus, not known nationally, but known in Buxton where he's from. A quiet worker, counselor, many times he would sternly and sometimes not so sternly warn me not to do this. One of my supporters passed away too soon. And we'll bury him this weekend. We'll bury him on Saturday. And so we're dedicating this program. He had a hand in naming this program Politics 101. Politics 101. I consulted him and he had a hand in the naming of this program. Farewell, my brother. And as we go through this week, you are in our thoughts and our memory. Good night, and see you all tomorrow night when we continue this series on Budget 2022.
Please help keep Politics 101 on social media and broadcast television. If you are in North America, please donate via Cash App or PayPal.
If you are in Guyana and the Caribbean and don't have access to Cash App and PayPal, email your pledge to dhines6106@aol.com and we will direct you how to get your donation to us. Thank you in advance for your donation.